black ocean of the city does not end, nor do its flashing lights. The sleepwalkers chase their next fleeting high. Beauty is all but dead, reduced to chemical formulas. Trapped in this dystopian iron prison, a young man begins having prophetic dreams.
Salutykov, Legionaries. I am broadcasting from the Elon Musk Mars base and transmitting to you live. No, I'm just kidding. This is Lance Legion. I have hijacked the Warrior Philosophers. I have pwned him on his channel. But today we have very special tidings. And today we're going to be talking about something very propitious, a God-sent image of, let's say, a great text, a secret text that's being published at dvxpublishing.com called Promethean Dreams by yours truly, the Warrior Philosopher. Warrior Philosopher, welcome to your show. It's mine now, by the way.
Yes, so we decided to have General Lance interview me today about my book that is coming out, which all you Legionaries surely will buy and support. I am writing it, or I have written it, and will be published under the name Patrick SALTYKOV. The SALTYKOV name is my ancestry that comes from the Russian nobility who were kicked out of the country by the communists. Of course, we will return and retake our rightful place, restore the Tsar, and crush what remains of the Reds. But that is where that name comes from. It is my grandmother, my father's mother, so my paternal grandmother's mother was of this line, the SALTYKOV line. And of course, she had the name Saltykova as a woman, which is the way it works in Russian. But Patrick SALTYKOV is my pen name. And yes, I have written a book by the name of Promethean Dreams. Lance will interview me about that today. And I am publishing it with Lance's company, DVX Publishing, or shall I say soon to be our company, as I will be joining the DVX Publishing team as well. So I'll kick it back to you, General Lance.
Thank you. This is my show. I own it. It's mine. It's very big, very great. No, at the end of the day, yeah, it's very interesting because obviously what's going on in the zeitgeist is, generally speaking, this kind of malaise, right? This kind of zeitgeist of tiredness, of lack of energy, lack of courage. Basically, what you probably listeners are used to of liberal bourgeois attitudes towards life. And I think, when I was reading through your book, and it's why we published it at the end of the day, and why I felt like it was immediately important that you're part of the team, was because of it struck right at the core of this question. And through the protagonist's view, kind of, I guess, goes into a kind of journey to the end of the night, but on his own terms, as a kind of rebuke to this zeitgeist. And I guess I wanted to ask you right out the gate, what were the experiences that were going through your mind when you wrote it? Because it's a really good book. I mean, it's short. It's a novelette type, book. It's, 144 pages, but in it, it's so packed with emotion and aesthetics. I kind of wanted to ask you, like, it must have been some kind of inspiration for you. What was your background to that?
Well, of course, in terms of literature and media, there are influences that shape the aesthetic vision of the book, some of which include Fight Club, Blade Runner, as well as even Taxi Driver. And then, of course, Sun and Steel is sort of the journey of the frail and bookworm Mishima into a strong and beautiful individual, right? Going from ugliness to weakness, which is one of the themes of this book. But in terms of my own life and what inspires that, I guess what all men go through in modernity without a war, there's that line in Fight Club, we have no great war, no great depression. Our great war is a spiritual war, our Great Depression is our lives. This is essentially that most men throughout history had a purpose, they had a meaning, they had a place, they had something that they had to attain or achieve. And of course, in modernity, there is no clear objective, especially for the young man. So I think we all go through this point in our lives that is very similar, where we seek, we strive for meaning and we strive for purpose, and we strive towards the ultimately, which is the expression of the will to power, which I think is what we all sort of want. We want to be strong, we want to be beautiful, we want to be virile. But in modernity, there is no arena, there is no training grounds to create individuals who can personify their inner will. But there's also no arena where we can fight for it either. There's no stage which we can perform the inner workings of the will. Right? There's no great war to fight, because that's generally, for most of human history, what we had is we had great wars, and you proved yourself as a man through war for much of human history. And now there is no great war. We live in great peace and great abundance. So we don't really know what to do with ourselves. We sort of, I forget if it's Mishima or somebody else, but they say in peaceful conditions, the violent man wages war on himself or something along those lines. And we
Yeah,
get
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche
Yeah.
says that, yeah. We get into all these destructive tendencies, whether it's drugs, whether it's pornography, whether it's just all these things that sort of numb us and narcotize us. This is something Nietzsche talks about, the narcotization of the soul through all these mind-numbing and physically numbing things, which is why pain is such a powerful thing. When everything is pleasure, and this is sort of a line from the book, when all things are pleasure, pain is the last true feeling. That's paraphrasing a line from the book. But essentially what the book is about is it takes place in this dystopian future, right? It's the end of history. Fukuyama won, Lance lost. Fukuyama was
Oh my god.
victorious,
Oh my god.
and everyone sort of lives in this world without pain, without struggle. There are these things called simulations, which are sort of a spin on the simulations in Blade Runner. You know, it's like this super hyper realistic virtual reality, and most people do that, or most people do drugs, or most people fuck sex robots. It's just this very decadent and purposeless society. And to me, I was viewing modern society today, and I was trying to think, what's an exaggerated form of modernity today? And I was trying to think of this exaggerated, well, what could it be in 30, 40, 50 years if the Fukuyamas are correct? And this is sort of what I concluded was it would be this type of world where everything revolves around pleasure. And because everything revolves around pleasure, nobody really feels true joy, and people have no purpose. And so individuals like the main character in the book struggle with this. They struggle in the reality of a life without beauty, because of course beauty comes from pain and struggle. And he's trying to figure out what to do with himself. He's skinny, he's frail, he's weak, but he knows that there is some good. He does have a semblance of the will, and the book is his journey of finding that will and figuring out how to personify it. Not unlike Fight Club, right, with a narrator stuck in this office space type life and world. It's not unlike Mishima's journey as this sort of frail bookworm who becomes a great warrior. He really becomes a samurai, a total human being. So it's this sort of modern or postmodern journey that I think every young man who is a true man, or at least wants to be a man, uh, can associate with and can relate to. And in my own life, it is my own struggles with finding purpose and how I have found purpose. Right, of course, I'm not there yet all the way. Life is a
Mhm.
constant becoming, but
Right.
it's my own observations of life and of the sort of condition of modern man and what it could be. It could be worse, and even in the worst conditions, how does modern man revolt against the modern world? To paraphrase from Evola, but yeah.
You know, it's interesting because, like, obviously, this is like I guess, a perennial thing. I mean, many people, they allude to the fact that modernity is in this way, right? Like, we talk about this as if it's a common occurrence, or rather, it's only a modern occurrence. But this is an incredibly historical, determinist point of view. this cycle of meaning and purposelessness exists in tandem in civilization in general. And obviously, from the position that we're talking from in our time, the zeitgeist is the end of civilization, right? We're living in the carcass of Western civilization. So there's no going back. There's no revivifying it. I have a lot of well-meaning friends that want to, but the truth is that it's dead. And whatever life we eke out of it, some of it are eating the carcass just to sustain themselves. And I think that you see that crystallized in the format of the individual who lives for petty pleasures. And you can think of this from the liberal, your average liberal redditor perspective. They just want their money. They just want to be able to jerk off on to internet porn, to basically like having that nonsensical career that means nothing, that's very sterilized from any kind of conflict. It's about comfort. And the reason why people pursue that comfort, which is just pleasure, different font, it's in fact, comfort is pleasure, but without the courage of actually pursuing the highest levels of hedonism. So at least you can respect someone of high vigor who pursues even the highest levels of hedonism, though I don't advise that. And your character, I don't want to give too much away because obviously I think you individuals, legionaries out there, should be reading the book itself and experiencing it for the first time. But if it's okay with you, Warrior, can we talk about the dialogue, which really stuck out to me between the protagonist and the woman? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So so meaning, right? Purpose. What is that as an existential definition? I mean, of course, there's no static, let's say, final end state, right? It's always this city on the horizon that you're trying to approach, right? It's the becoming. However, you can see, especially when we're living in an era where there are no real, there may be breadcrumbs, but there is no trail and there's no path, and people don't even know the city exists. And so much of it is the man existing in time, but kind of fumbling around in the dark. And but but even when he fumbles around the dark, it's almost like the trail reveals himself through unconscious willing to kind of connect with someone, right? And you see this in this connection with the protagonist, the story, and the lady. And if you don't mind giving the background to the conversation, so that way we can give a better, like, kind of philosophical perspective and analysis for the legionaries out there.
Yeah. What specifically about that did you want to delve into?
So they're like basically talk about. I wanted to explain, for instance, what is life if not physically, the will to power, yes, but it's also living. Will to power isn't the low sense of being necessarily powerful in a political or conventional sense, but it's living the life in the way that boasts best, let's say, uh, aesthetically expresses you. And so there's this moment in time where he basically grabs the chick, right? That
Yeah.
is with his, like, her soy jack, right? And basically, I guess I wanted to kind of explore the theme of basically making things yours
Hmm.
and
Okay.
making that a synthesis of oneself. And I kind of wanted to give a background as to how is that dynamic played out, and we can just go from there.
Yeah. So in the beginning of the book, the character uh, basically is the soy jack, right? He says, and again, I'm paraphrasing my own words. Unfortunately, I have not memorized my whole book by heart.
Oh,
Homer would be disappointed, but he says
straight to
something.
prison.
Yeah, exactly. Beheaded, but he says something along the lines of, "I watch because all I can do is watch," right? And part of modernity is that it sort of turns everybody into cucks. You're watching sports, right? Because we're not in there playing sports. We watch war films. We're not fighting in the films. People are literally watching pornography because they're not fucking. Life is all about observation in modernity because there's less doing. We're not even growing our own food, right?
Right.
We're lucky enough if we have a job that we care about and we're actually doing something that contributes to the greater, life cycle or whatever. But most people's dopamine comes from observation, and it's exacerbated to an extreme point in the book with something such as the simulations. You're not experiencing any of this; it's all being fed into your mind, right? So even if you're experiencing it, you're still observing it on a meta level, and because he himself is so weak and so in his mind ugly and so lacking in power, really, all he can do is watch. And I think that the difference between the master and the slave is precisely that. And in terms of the personification of the will to power can manifest in various different ways, but the central unifying thread behind the will to power is ultimately doing versus watching, right? It's, do you find joy in watching or do you find joy in doing? You
Yes.
know,
Do you sit in the cuck chair or are you the bull of life? Right.
exactly. And I forget. Lance always likes to talk about movies and be like, "Well, actually, this is the hero of the movie, and that guy's a villain." So my funny, this guy's the true um, hero. So in Great Gatsby, I'm trying to remember the name of the bad guy in The Great Gatsby. He's the
Oh yeah,
Tom
yeah, yeah.
Buchanan. Yeah, Tom
Yeah.
Buchanan's the hero. He's not the villain. I'm playing, but he does say something to Nick. He's like, do you want to just watch on the sidelines or do you want to play ball, right? And
Right.
the personification of the will is playing ball. It's inserting yourself into life and living life, not just watching, not just waiting for life to come to you. Because when life comes at you, it's probably not going to be good. This is the difference between the master and the slave. The slave's whole existence is surrounded by what are external forces going to do to their life. They have no control over their life, right? Literally. They work all day because the master makes them work, and they eat their slop at the end of the day, and their wife gets fucked by the master. That's the life of the slave. He has no control over his life, and
Yep.
the life of the master is actually enforcing his own will onto the world around him. Is controlling life. Because essentially what power is control. So when we look at modernity or post-modernity or the future or whatever, the personification of the will happens when you try to change the world around you and you try to influence the world around you in some way. And the character, of course, at first all he can do is watch, but as he begins to go through this spiritual transformation, not unlike Mishima's, right? Because like I mentioned, it is inspired by Mishima's philosophies. Once you, for example, become physically powerful yourself, you will also become mentally powerful. And not only will you now have the physical means of shaping the world around you, influencing the world around you, but you'll be able to figure out how. And for some people, that's creating art. For some people, that is through literal power, right? Maybe they become
Right.
a politician or a great soldier,
Like a
great general.
Napoleon or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. You have
Or
Napoleons.
Leonardo da Vinci, or
Precisely.
basically, exactly. Go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt.
No, you're
I
good.
feel yeah.
Life is a canvas, right? And all the masters paint the canvas, and the slaves just look at the canvas. They have nothing to contribute. Ultimately, life is a trajectory upwards. And if you are not contributing to that trajectory upwards, then you are a slave. And that's why will to power is not just hard power. It's how do you contribute to the power of upward trajectory. So the artist does that by creating art which inspires. You couldn't really have Napoleons or Caesars without great artists that came before them.
Yes.
Take Caesar for example, right? And he's inspired by the Greek legends. He's inspired by Alexander. If there's nobody to paint the beautiful life of Alexander in history, or of Hercules or of Achilles, then
So
they would not
Homer,
inspire.
basically, right?
Exactly, Homer, right? He is as responsible for the creation of Caesar as the man who probably taught Caesar how to fight with a gladius. These people are equally important, but they're all contributing to this upward trajectory. And so the will to power manifests in a variety of ways. And to be specific with the example you were bringing up from the book, yeah, he goes from the guy who's just going to watch these people going through life, and then he transforms into this guy who just takes life, and there's a scene in that specific scene that you're talking about where this woman he's been romantically involved with is sort of trying to stay away from him, not because there's anything wrong with him, but she tastes realness in him, and it's a lot easier to consume what is false when you're so used to consuming what is false, and
It's
instead of
overwhelming. Do you mind if I
yeah,
interject? I'm so
go for
sorry
it. Yeah,
because
no, you're
this
good, totally good.
this was actually my favorite dialogue, and when I was reading through it, it kind of builds up like a crescendo, in my personal opinion, because the first 50 pages, you're like, all right, kind of not getting through per se, but like you're kind of waiting for it to start, almost like life start to flicker. It's almost like a spark, and then finally you get to this moment, and it feels like a crescendo of necessarily, and it reveals itself in the eyes and the reactions of this chick, right?
Hmm.
Because it's just like you say, it overwhelms. I mean, when you're someone of strong conviction or strong virtue or simply effusing yourself, it can be overwhelming. I mean, not to overdo the Plato, allegory, but the cave, the person that's not used to the sunlight, they're blinded by the sunlight the first time they perceive it. But
Right.
if you experience this, legionaries, in your personal life, and I hope that you take these podcasts not simply sitting in the cuck chair of life, but to inspire you, invigorate you to actually do something beyond simply whatever it may be, no matter how humble at the time your first steps are. Remember, because we start with humble first steps as toddlers, right? But then we just learn to walk, and then we finally learn to run and sprint, and then of course get over obstacles and possibly join the Marine Corps. I don't know, but the point is that I'm trying to make is like, you know, like, you have to understand that when you effuse yourself, there will be many people who are unaccustomed, especially cowards, especially people who are slaves of the certain, of basically they're just unaccustomed to what it is to mean to live life, especially in a highly sterilized environment, which Warrior so beautifully and aesthetically makes the case for. Because what I enjoy about your book the most is the fact that in many ways that reality is seductive. Like, it's not painting it as necessarily dystopia outright. It's not like The Road by McCormack McCarthy where everything sucks. It's like living in Las Vegas, except you win at every slot. But all the slots, even no matter how much money you make, it's just meaningless, right? And the true bag, so to speak, to secure is the dangerous one, right? And it's basically taking that risk. And so in the course of this conversation, to get back to the dynamic between the lady and the protagonist, like, it's not necessarily that he pulls it off, right? It's not necessarily that he succeeds in his interaction with this chick. That's like like a sidebar, if that makes sense. The internal victory is there, right? And so we will attempt many things and achieve, we may not achieve them in the material world, but the victory within is what the existential experience of life should be about. And it's Teddy Roosevelt, Man in the Arena. At least he wasn't a cold and timid soul who lined the spectator stadium. He was in the arena, marred, so to speak, by both defeat and victory, but he attempted and he fought. And that's worth more than anything, more than a long and timid, pallid life sitting in the cuck chair, never getting your dick wet, so to speak. And so, like, the obviously the book is replete with this stuff, and I really don't want to get into necessarily the nitty gritty of the details because I don't like spoilers. Because I want you to allow yourself, Legionaries, when you're reading, to get in the mindset of where this person's at. And you should have the images that were conjured in my mind were kind of a Blade Runner esque Las Vegas kind of basically nightclub scene of basically what it feels like on a nice summer night in California, and all the lights are bright, and the experience of life, you're basically achieving what the normie thinks is the high life. And yet there is this dissatisfaction. It's this, despite all the luster of the night, despite all the neon colors and the feeling of sexuality dripping at every, I guess, corner and facet, there exists this sharp, fiery blade that is becoming pronounced within the soul of the protagonist over time. And that is the probably the most interesting contrast to me, aesthetically speaking, of your book. And if I may be so bold, if I may be so self-congratulating, but I would say that the formatting of the book is actually really cool too, to inspire the understanding. So if you get the paperback, it will be released, by the way, on 27th of February, and we'll get into that in a moment. But all the pages are right justified, right? Almost like pushing the reader to get to the end of the night, to get to the crescendo of the story. And like the first line of every chapter is a red, a scarlet red, just like to make a poem of your life with a dash of blood. And I think it's just so interesting because as a trifecta, as an aesthetic experience, I mean, though you and I, we may not live in this dystopian kind of reality, ultimately we feel it. We feel it, especially by proxy, through these parasocial relationships on the internet, through the kind of like very richly, uh, let's say, artifice, websites and all this kind of stuff. Or if you're somewhat of a Chad, you go out at nightclubs, and God forbid you go to modern nightclubs. It's full of like disgusting people nowadays. I mean, I don't have a problem with nightclubs. I love nightclubs. It's just that the biological refuse that happens to pack these places is just awful. But anyway, I've been blacklisted from a number of different nightclubs for number of different reasons. I won't get into it. Okay, it's very personal. But no, in all seriousness, Warrior, like I think you do a great job of immersing the reader into the protagonist's self-understanding and self-discovery. Not to sound like a libtard, but like truly a self manifesting over time, and it becomes like this blade that cuts through all of the mendacity of reality. And so, I mean, I guess you talked about, obviously, Palahniuk's book, or rather, the story of Fight Club. Like, is that a main source of inspiration to you? And by the way, why is it that we're releasing on the 27th of February?
So, yeah, so 27th of February, obviously the day before February 26th, it's the Young Officers Revolution, or Young Officers coup in Japan back in 1936. So it's a fortuitous time. It is a time which represents the young dreamer revolting against the malaise of that which is currently at the top. And of course, at the time, young officers felt that the Zaibatsu, the sort of industrial and mercantile new elite class in Japan, was corrupting it. So they attempted their coup to give the emperor more authorities and make him stronger. And even though they failed, actually, over the next 4 years, Japan became far more militaristic and fanatical. So in some ways, they did win, in a way, because they had to get that way to be able to fight in their war.
It was a spiritual revolution that succeeded, much in the same way of your book. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it was a spiritual revolution that succeeded, even though in the material setting, it didn't necessarily have the immediate impact it sought.
Right. But going to Chuck Palahniuk, I always say his name wrong. how do you say his last name?
Palahniuk, I think.
Palahniuk, yeah. Whatever.
Get a real name.
I can't say that I intentionally made it like Fight Club, but Fight Club has always been a super profound influence on my life. It was one of the first times, like when I watched Fight Club as I forget how old I was. I was pretty young to have watched it, like maybe before middle school or whatever, around middle school. And I used to stay up at night and watch movies on my computer or on my phone. Sometimes I would purposely watch movies till 2 a.m. so I would seem sick the next morning and I wouldn't have to go to school. I'd always do this on a Thursday, by the way, so I could get a long weekend. I forget if I pulled that this time, but I would do that a lot, and I would stay up, and it was really fun. I would stay up on my MacBook watching movies, though I think I watched this one on my phone. And I would go on 123 Movies. You probably heard of that.
Yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
went by a different name before. I can't remember what it was called, but I would watch these free movies online. It'd be great. And I was watching Fight Club for the first time, and I was just so profoundly impacted by it. And I just, it just felt so real in terms of the message behind it and just the aesthetics of it and all that. So Fight Club has always been a big influence in my life because it's something that every young man, like I said, that wants to be a man, can can appreciate, right, and relate to. And there's a word I'm looking for, and blank, like they can empathize with it, I guess. Uh,
Well, more than empathize, sympathize, right?
Sympathize.
Because
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. That's what
yeah,
I'm looking for.
go for it.
Yeah, they sympathize with that story because a lot of us, feel trapped in this iron prison. And I sort of use this terminology a little bit throughout the book. I talk about the black ocean of the city. You feel trapped, right? You feel trapped by this world
Yes.
that tries to numb you, tries to narcotize you. It tries to castrate you, really. And that's the whole thing with Fight Club. And I've talked about this many times on my channel. At the beginning of Fight Club is literally castrated males coming together and crying like women, because that is an allegory for what modernity has done to men. It has castrated them of this healthy, will to violence, will to power, will to be beautiful, and it's taken that away because it's. I mean, literally, as a boy, they tell you not to play fight. I think that's the most dangerous thing you could do. In fact,
Yeah.
you'd have less school shooters if people fought more with their fists. I mean, that's the
Amen.
reality. A bully will bully you, but if you stand up to them, generally there'll be some sort of respect. As long as you carry yourself well. But these school shooters, they don't have any avenue to express themselves violently, so they do it in a really gay and pathetic way instead of in the old days when it was acceptable to just fucking fight it out. Um, so you never see somebody who does martial arts doing a school shooting, because they're able to get rid of the energy. But anyway, this all is the same problem. It's this castration of masculinity, essentially. So yeah, Fight Club has always been a big influence. And in this book specifically that I wrote, I would say that the influences of Fight Club, they've always been with me, but to look into specific areas of the story, there are scenes that are directly inspired from Fight Club. Without spoiling too much, there is this sort of not quite a Fight Club, but with the people he meets and the friends he makes, there is a similar sort of dynamic to people trying to tap in and reaffirm this strong force, this strong energy that has been lost and taken from them. And like you said, it's a very short book, so it definitely it's sort of, I mean, it's called Promethean Dreams, and it reads like a dream because it's happening so fast. Not everything is really explored in full. It's not like a long book where things are built up and you read 600 pages of the story that has been built up with all these different things. This is very quick. This is one person's dialogue or monologue, whatever. It's like it's first person, so
It's
you're
their dream. Literally, it is exactly as you say. It feels like a dream, and it's quick, but it's poignant. And frankly, it's probably the best format, especially as we go into the future where people's attention spans are fried. Like, I think it's probably better than, 1,000-page tome of like Dostoevsky, because
yeah.
we're not used to that slow burn. We
I should
want,
have made
and
it
it's
shorter.
yeah, no, seriously, unironically, likely, but it's still like very readable. I mean, I read it in an afternoon, and it was great, and it's truly a page turner. I mean, I remember when he first gave it to me, I was like, oh wow, oh dang, and by the end of it, I was like done.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead. I just got carried away. Go ahead.
No, I was pretty much done with my point there. But yeah, I made some since the time you first read it. Obviously, there's been some minor changes in the book, for example, but I think there were good changes. I mean, you mentioned reading the part where he takes the girl from the soy jack. I think it was a lot better that way than I originally had it planned. So yeah, I mean, I put a lot of time, obviously, the past year revising things. Picked it up and put it down for a little bit, and then picked it up again to make some changes. But yeah, you read it. You read the first version. I think it must have been in June, and
Right, right. No, and just to kind of give it background before we lose the mental tether here is, talking about Project Mayhem, right? So Fight Club, for those of you who haven't like freaking watched it. First of all, watch it and read it. Like you have no excuse. But second of all, the understanding is that Project Mayhem is in effect this complete rejection of the material world in a very real sense, right? Think about all the crap that you fill your house with. I mean, the house is a place of filth. It's a place of filth. Why? Because you become emotionally attached to things which don't matter, especially because they don't have permanence. I mean, what I mean by that like a kind of a real sense is, you're not your clothes, you're not a Lamborghini Bugatti, you're not like the books that you have physically around you. You're not those things. You are the weaver, not the tapestry, if that makes sense. And so the tapestry, right? If you're weaving a freaking carpet, like that can get eaten away, it can be burned, it can be whatever, it can be stolen, but you're the artisan, the one that is weaving it, the story of his life, that's forever. That's forever. And why is it forever? It's forever because it happens, for instance, in Homer, how he weaves reality into existence. And many of you think that, like, especially we live in Western civilization, you think that you have nothing to do with Homer, right? Just because you don't know his name or you don't know the content of the Iliad or the Odyssey or whatever. But you are still his felt expression. You are infinite derivations of that initial tapestry, that initial synthesis. And to kind of bring it full circle, I was reading an essay by Peter Thiel from 2007 talking about the crisis of the Western world is one in which we're overcoming liberalism in the form of John Locke. Because remember, John Locke, the reason why he was writing The Rights of Man and the initial liberalism, the kind of being quote unquote above religion and what he perceived to be the petty convictions of man which could not be rationally proven, i.e., religion, i.e., values of concepts such as honor, right? This is why we believe in egalitarianism. This is why we believe that concepts such as honor or being maligned is not justification enough to take revenge, right? And the reason why he wrote that, because he was writing in counterposition to, first of all, the 30 Years' War, which caused millions of deaths over the question of religion, Protestantism versus Catholicism, and of course his experience with Cromwell and the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, as they call it. But it's anything but that. But the greater point that I'm trying to make is that Peter Thiel was explaining that yes, that kind of let's say tactful or rather tactical philosophy that puts away these important things and privatizes these personal convictions and not simply disincentivizes but delegitimizes the idea that one should fight for more than simply one's personal accretion, one's personal liberty, in the sense of being an automaton. Like, this is the core of why, of course, technology was able to flourish, due to the fact that there are no more spiritual mores against usury or against industry beyond simply the infinite accumulation of wealth. There are no convictions that actually bind these values and enflesh them in reality anymore. And so what happens is that man becomes completely infatuated with the material. And the material, of course, for the majority of people means material accumulation of wealth, of things, of personal pleasure, but completely absent of meaning. And this was good for technology, but bad for the condition of man. And so here, some hundreds of years, hence, right? I think 350 years or so, we're starting to understand that the material poverty, or rather the material wealth of our time, has led to a spiritual poverty. And that the condition of man himself, and this is what Nietzsche was talking about, he came ahead of his time, but really came into its flesh right now in 2025, in the turn of the millennia, is that man does not care, especially Gen Z, does not care about the material aspects as much anymore. They don't. They fell out of love with, they become adhedonistic because we are so overstimulated, like especially with technology or whatever, with the video games and cheap pleasures, that we've been actually anesthetized to the allure of these material accumulations, and so we're pursuing things that actually mean something. And my friends, as I keep on telling you, and if you follow me personally, you'll hear this: run towards pain. Why is pain more powerful, more meaningful than anything? And this is why Nietzsche talks about it's not necessarily a great cause that is valuable, it's the pain that consecrates in its pursuit that sacralizes everything. And to make this real in your personal life, what this means is that you will never achieve what you want through euphoria, especially cheap euphoria. You will achieve what you want on the other side of pain. And of course, the first pangs of pain are twofold: fear and boredom. Both these things are overcome in the pursuit of choosing your existential becoming. And the protagonist of the book so perfectly elucidates this fact, this central engine of what's happening in our life, in real life, in your life. I mean, there's only so much that you can enjoy about the video games, about the petty pleasures of your career, and the soft pussy that you manage to get or whatever. Like, that shit goes away. But what always remains, are the things you sacrificed for, that you suffered for, that you toiled for. No matter how petty or small it may seem, you may not be a Caesar, but remember, one of you legionaries, some of you, especially if you're listening to this, you have that potential. But I go back to my point. It's not about the outcome. It's about harvesting the most out of this existence. And the catalyst to that is overcoming fear. It's overcoming boredom. It is overcoming pain itself. And so, of course, the protagonist through the story is a story of the overcoming of the central theme of, instead of pursuing pleasure, he becomes a rebuke to that, and instead searches out that which not simply is forbidden or disincentivized, but absolutely and positively in every dimension fought against. Think about your life. Think about like your personal life, dude. Like, I'm sorry if, like, I'm kind of dropping persona, but I'm getting kind of heated. Like, everything that you have been taught since you were a kid has been built to make you a loser. It's been built to make you a slave. And yes, the majority of humanity is, and that's the sad truth of life. But if you're listening to this, there's something within you. There's something within you that's telling you to pursue exactly what the protagonist of Promethean Dreams is pursuing in the course of the novel. But I apologize. I get a little bit distracted. The Furies, they take control of my mind. So I hope you can forgive me, Warrior. But I feel very passionate about this, and I hope you can see that literature like this is precisely what you need, because it forms a catalyst to everything else in your life. This is why the leftists have such a preoccupation, especially as you see with this episode with US Aid, of completely, before you take action, you must first think. And so if they completely change the culture, if they obliterate any other narratives which give rise, catalyze action, meaningful action, higher action, then there is no action, right? And this is part and parcel of keeping you in this servitude, this, keeping you in your little yob, keeping you in your little life. And ultimately, it's the prison of the mind, it's the prison of the soul, it's the iron prison, right? And therefore, this is what Warrior is giving you. He's not giving you a book. He's not giving you an aesthetic experience where you can be like, oh, that was enjoyable. He's giving you a call to action, to your personal life, to be like a protagonist of your own story, the hero of your own life. And so I hope you understand how important this book is beyond everything. But Warrior, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's as you say. This is something that I think all of you who relate to the literally me characters, the Travis Bickles, the narrators from Fight Club, Ryan Gosling, as any Ryan Gosling character ever. Um, this book is another sort of similar experience. It's we all have this great struggle that we must overcome and triumph over, and and in my book specifically, it's in this setting where all the knobs are turned up, all the things that you feel are wrong now are wrong tenfold there, and everything is an inviting addiction trying to lure you away from the path towards personification of the will. Everything's trying to distract you. Everything's trying to numb you, with comfort, with warmth, with
Right.
with pleasure, and nonetheless, there is a way out. And all of us fall short of our ideals at one time or another, again and again and again. But as long as you dedicate yourself to constantly getting back up and constantly getting back towards the path of where pain and pleasure walk alongside each other, because there is no pleasure without pain. And I mean, on the flip side, there's no pain without pleasure, right? Life is about the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, and that is the life of the man specifically, and of great men, is experiencing the lowest of the lows, which only make greater the highest of the highs. So
Yes.
this book is
Yes.
that and more. So that's kind of, without getting too much into it, what I have to say about that.
I guess I had a question. What would you suggest for readers that okay, this is all great in abstraction, right? It's great to understand these things. Maybe you're enthused, and maybe you're like, okay, yes. How do I learn? How do I do this? What are some practical avenues of approach that we can pursue that approximate us to the paradigm in real life? Because words are just words, right? And feelings can be fleeting. But what is kind of a physical place we can go, or an action we can physically take to understand what you mean by this overcoming of pain, or this kind of pursuit of this obviously very much synergized pairing of pleasure and pain in life?
Yeah, well, I think it's the sort of cliche of work hard, play hard, right? But instead of thinking of that in a business setting, think about that where life is this war, right? It's in this war we're going to suffer, we're going to go through immense hardship, heartbreak, whatever. But that's a good thing, right? Seek the things that hurt you. But on the flip side, open yourself to the things that taste deliciously, because things will taste better when you first have to suffer for them. So
Hmm. Hmm.
go to the gym, right? Work out, get jacked, and at the same time, put yourself in a position in which we can foster a greater future, right? Sacrifice for a greater future. Make sure
I always
patriots
make
are in control.
I always make this joke is most people they do drugs for the up. I do it for the down. I do, and so that's the funny thing is like, and also before I get too far away, I would suggest doing MMA specifically. I'm very thankful for my mother who got me involved in, like, first of all, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the age of 5, but then of course MMA later in my life, did striking. But the reason why is because the catalyst is, of course, the positive affirmation of pain. You get your shit rocked, you rock other people's shit. And the thing is, there's not really much about that experience which is necessarily pleasureful in the hedonistic way. But on the other side of it, you can feel the exhilaration of having giving it your all, or really run the risk of losing a fight. Like, I think that's something that I remember. Lost my first fight when I was 5, jiu-jitsu, and I was like, man, I was fuming for the next 4 days until I got back and I paired up with the same dude and I crushed him. And there's something exhilarating in that self overcoming, because it wasn't necessarily about, there are actual stakes. There was actual wanting to overcome something, and a real barrier to it, a true barrier that was a measure of my personal power myself. I remember making the other kid cry. It was hilarious. I was like, fuck yeah. And so, no, but in the military, in spite of itself, in spite of like all the DEI communists, like, very kind thing, it still has to rely on this basic mechanisms, because war is probably the fundamental nature of nature itself, right? It is the core of what nature is, and we experience it, even though we are so removed, and maybe we can get ourselves to a very, how do you say, cushy position, but it still doesn't deny the fact that life is only rends you fruits only when you conquer it, right? And therefore there's friction in between, and that friction is the secret, right? That friction is that pain, or rather pain is a byproduct of that. But what I'm trying to explain is that, pursue these avenues, if not the military, MMA, the gym, something, if you're kind of more of an intellectual, big brain math kind of guy, pursuing the difficult questions, straining yourself, going to the point where your fibers are ripping apart, whether it's in your body, in your head, or in your soul, and then self overcoming. And so, I guess, we're getting to the hour mark here. I wanted to, if you, any last thoughts as far as, the book, DVX, what your kind of vision of the future is, and will there be a sequel?
Yeah, I actually do have thoughts for a sequel. I've already sort of brainstormed a little bit, but it really depends on. Really depends. Who knows how life goes? I have lots of projects. Now that I'm jumping on and working with you on DVX, who knows? But I do have plans for a sequel if I do intend to pursue that direction. But the sort of last things I'll end with before I go, get my calorie surplus so I can get big and juicy. For DVX, our plan for the future is more original work. So far, the only original works we will have thus far from the company are Lance's work, Cesar Bellator, and then my own, Promethean Dreams. But we want more. We want much more original works from you, those legionaries with a will towards more, a will towards artistry, and a will towards contributing to the beauty of this world. So I implore you, legionaries with an artistic mind, to consider if you now have any plans of publishing or of writing works, especially fiction. I think we need a lot more of that today. Fiction with a right-wing orientation. Please reach out to us, right? We are looking for new talent, and we are trying to expand. Maybe you are good at something book related, and you're looking to increase your portfolio. Reach out to us. We're trying to expand and really contribute to the cultural renaissance of the new right in this country and throughout the world. But that's all I'll leave off with. We will have a pre-sale from Promethean Dreams at some point once everything's through, but it will be out February 27th, and I hope every one of you legionaries gets a copy. Take some badass pictures on the beach, maybe get some voids in them, let's have fun with this.
That's right, and take pictures in a nightclub, maybe. That'd be kind of cool. I want to see Chads. But anyway, because Patriots are in control, I'm in control of this transmission from Mars. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. This is the Warrior Philosopher with the Warrior Teachings, and obviously Warrior Philosopher himself, Lance Legion, signing off.